Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this program. My name is Dominic Lee. I'm a legislator in Hong Kong, and I'm your host for today's seminar. The UK Parliament and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, we call the CPA, had invited Hong Kong Legislative Council to send representatives to attend their Westminster Seminar on Effective Parliaments this coming March, at which fellow legislator Carmen and myself were previously chosen by Let's Go to attend. However, the CPA decided to withdraw the invitation on 26th of January, citing deteriorating situation and a serious erosion of political plurality and participation in Hong Kong. In my view, the decision made by the CPA was like a child play, as the invitation was made to us last November, and since then there were no major change in our political system. Our legislative body is still diverse. Our rule of law index remained one of the best in the world, ranking 22nd in the World Justice Project Index. The accusations about deteriorating situation are simply unfounded. It is part of the anti-China rhetoric adopted by Western politicians in recent years and are intended to discredit our enhanced political system adopted since 2021. The CPA claims that one of the seminar's objectives is for delegates to share the knowledge and good practice with other legislatures. So if the CPA indeed thinks that the situation in Hong Kong has deteriorated, why don't they take this opportunity to learn more about our new system through our participation before criticizing? Western politicians have always stressed the importance of listening to the people of Hong Kong. Being a democratically elected representative who have received north of 60,000 votes in the last election, even if I cannot represent all of Hong Kong residents, I can at least represent a good portion of the people here. So why are they refusing to listen to our side of the story? Also, according to the event invitation, another one of the seminar's objectives is to promote parliamentary democracy. However, throughout the 150 years of British governance in Hong Kong, why didn't they adopt the parliamentary system here? And why didn't they give democracy to the people of Hong Kong? If they indeed care so much about parliamentary democracy, then why didn't they promote it here when Hong Kong was still under their rule? We condemn CPA's decision to rescind our invitation to Westminster seminar. The decision was based on unfounded accusations and was a blatant slander on our enhanced political system. So, in response to CPA's unfair comments and decision, Hong Kong United Foundation, together with the China Retold, decided to organize our own seminar on Hong Kong legislature today, and we have invited former and incumbent lawmakers to tell both local and international audience why Hong Kong legislature is more democratic and broadly representative than it was under British rule. The CPA's withdrawal of our invitation will not damage our spirit. It will only make us more determined to do more. And this seminar today is only a beginning. As a lawmaker in Hong Kong, I will continue to seek different opportunities to speak out positively about China and Hong Kong. We will let the world hear our true story and let them know what we are all about. So without further ado, I would like to invite our guest speakers on stage. Our first speaker really needs no introduction. He is the Vice Chairman of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference and is also our former Chief Executive of Hong Kong. Lesser known to the public, he was the Secretary General of the Basic Law Consultative Committee. Now please give a big round of applause to welcome our first speaker, Mr. C.Y. Leung.
Thank you, Dominic. Dominic and Carmen, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The Sino-British Joint Declaration, signed by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher on behalf of the British government on the 19th of December 1984, has the following clause. The Hong Kong Chief Executive, I quote, will be appointed by the Central People's Government on the basis of the results of elections or consultations held locally, unquote. In the main text of the Joint Declaration, the only reference to the legislature was, I quote, the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region will be vested with executive, legislative, and independent judicial power, unquote. It did not, I repeat, it did not make any reference to the method of forming the legislature. It was Annex 1 to the Joint Declaration, which was the, I quote again, elaboration by the government of the People's Republic of China. Now, please note, it's not the British government of its basic policies regarding Hong Kong, unquote, that provides for elections to the legislature in the following way, quote, the legislature of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall be constituted by elections, unquote. Now, this is the Chinese side, not the British side. But then it did not specify the method of election. The absence of the method of forming the legislature in the main text of the Joint Declaration is hardly surprising. All members of the British Hong Kong Legislative Council had been appointed without any form of election by British governors for 143 years until 1985, the year when the British realized that they would leave Hong Kong in 1997. In 1985, only some of the Legislative Council seats were opened up for elections in the form of functional constituency elections. Universal suffrage and direct election to the Legislative Council was initiated only in 1991, 149 years after the British had ruled Hong Kong, and 6 years before they handed Hong Kong back to China. But even then, only some of the seats were so elected. It is extreme hypocrisy on the part of the UK parliamentary group to invite two duly elected members of the Hong Kong Legislative Council to the 2023 Westminster Seminar on Effective Parliaments, citing, I quote, deteriorating situation, unquote, and, quote, serious erosion of political plurality and participation, unquote, in Hong Kong. Also, it is extreme irony for this UK parliamentary group to showcase the so-called effective parliament. It is worldwide consensus that the British political system, and not just its parliament, is totally ineffective and dysfunctional. Evidence abound. Brexit becoming Regrexit, poor economy, difficult public finance, widespread industrial actions, high and rising crime rates, crumbling healthcare system, poor infrastructure. This list could go on and on, not to mention the unelected upper house of parliament. On all these fronts, Hong Kong has done better, a lot better, than the UK since it became a Chinese special administrative region in 1997. Perhaps in the first place, the two members, Dominic and Carmen, of the Hong Kong Legislative Council should not have been invited to the 2023 Westminster Seminar on Effective Parliaments, because the Hong Kong Legislative Council is not a parliament. It never was. The name Legislative Council, which was used by the British during their entire 155-year rule and then adopted by the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, clearly denotes its local and not sovereign nature. Hong Kong, unlike, say, Singapore, did not become an independent sovereign state upon the departure of the British. It became a special administrative region that is part of China. Democracy in Hong Kong is therefore not a sovereign democracy, where the people have the ultimate powers. What Hong Kong has is a local democracy. All local democracies, such as those in London, New York, or Tokyo, can only produce local authorities with very limited powers. On the other hand, the chief executive of Hong Kong and the government that he leads has much greater powers, which gives Hong Kong the high degree of autonomy that Hong Kong enjoys under the one country, two systems principle. The greater powers that the Hong Kong Chief Executive has are not the results of the mandate of the Hong Kong people, which can only produce powers such as those of the London mayor. They are the results of authorization by the central government in Beijing. This is the rationale behind the requirement for substantive appointment of Chief Executive by Beijing, and this is exactly what the Sino-British Joint Declaration stated. I quote, "will be appointed by the Central People's Government on the basis of the results of elections or consultations held locally," unquote. The British agreed to this. Indeed, in this white paper that was published a week after the initialing of the Joint Declaration, the following in bold print, and this was published by the British government, says, I quote, "Her Majesty's government believe that the agreement," meaning the Joint Declaration, "is a good one. They strongly commend it to the people of Hong Kong and to Parliament," unquote. The Westminster Seminar on Effective Parliaments will be held in mid-March. Those who decided to withdraw the invitation to the Hong Kong Legislative Council members now have a full month to study the Sino-British Joint Declaration. If anyone intends to regurgitate the allegation that China has breached the Joint Declaration, they will have to be factual and specific. Thank you.
Thank you, CY. Our next speaker is someone who has seen it all. Not only is she a member of the MPCSC Basic Law Committee and a former member of the Basic Law Drafting Committee, she also participated in 4 different levels of Hong Kong's Representative Council, including the Executive Council, the Legislative Council, the Urban Council, and the District Board before the handover. So who's better qualified to speak to us about the shortcomings of the Hong Kong system under British rule other than her? Please give a big round of applause to welcome our next speaker, Ms. Maria Tam.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give a comparison of the function of the legislature before and after 1997. Before 1997, the Hong Kong governor was appointed by the Queen and represented her in ruling Hong Kong. The governor was also the commander-in-chief of the British military force, and until February 1993, he was also the president of the Legislative Council. This means that the governor controlled the executive, the Legislative Council, and the British military in Hong Kong. Only the Queen can remove the governor. However, under the Basic Law, the chief executive is elected by Hong Kong's Electoral College and ultimately by universal suffrage. He would be appointed by the Central People's Government, and the president of the Legislative Council is elected by and from its members. I'm going to cite a few examples from the Basic Law to prove that the Legislative Council's check and balance power over the chief executive is far, far more than the Legislative Council before 1997 over the governor. Under Article 52 of the Basic Law, the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region must resign under any of the following circumstances. 1, when he or she loses the ability to discharge his or her duties as a result of serious illness or other reasons. 2, when after the Legislative Council is dissolved because he or she twice refused to sign a bill passed by the Legislative Council, and a new one is elected and pass it again by 2/3 majority, then he or she still decide but he or she still refuses to sign it, then he or she must resign. And when, after the Legislative Council is dissolved because it refuses to pass a budget or any other important bill, the new Legislative Council still refuses to pass the original bill in dispute, then he or she must resign. The chief executive can be impeached under the Basic Law, Article 73(9). The Legislative Council of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the Legislative Council of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall exercise the following powers and functions. If a motion initiated jointly by 1/4 of all the members of the Legislative Council charges the Chief Executive with serious breach of law or dereliction of duty, and if he or she refuses to resign, the Council may, after passing a motion for investigation, give mandate to the Chief Justice of the Court of Final Appeal to form and chair an independent investigation committee. The committee shall be responsible for carrying out the investigation and reporting its findings to the Council. If the committee considers the evidence sufficient to substantiate such charges, the Council may pass a motion of impeachment by a 2/3 majority of all its members and report it to the Central People's Government for decision. So there's a big contrast between before 1997 and after 1997. On the issue of universal suffrage in Hong Kong under British rule, the United Kingdom made a declaration relevant to Hong Kong in respect of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights upon signature as follows. The government of the United Kingdom declares that in relation to Article 25 of the Covenant, they must reserve the right not to apply, come to subparagraph B, insofar as it may require the establishment of an elected legislature in Hong Kong and the introduction of equal suffrage. This meant that under the British law and under British rule, we could not have universal suffrage election in Hong Kong. Contrary to that, on the issue of universal suffrage, the Basic Law provides for universal suffrage of the Chief Executive and the Legislature as follows. Article 45. The Chief Executive of Hong Kong, a special administrative region, shall be elected by election or through consultations held locally and be appointed by the Central People's Government. The method for selecting the Chief Executive shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in Hong Kong's special administrative region and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress. The ultimate aim is the selection of the Chief Executive by universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. And then for the Legislative Council, Article 68 says, the method of forming the Legislative Council shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in Hong Kong and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress. The ultimate aim is the election of all members of the Legislative Council by universal suffrage. So universal suffrage has got nothing to do with the British government or the Joint Declaration. It's being given to us through the Basic Law by the Central People's Government. We come to the question of the members' constitution in the Legislative Council. Before 1985, the Legislative Council members were all appointed by the governor, and only from 1985, after the Sino-British Joint Declaration over the future of Hong Kong was signed, did Britain quickly instituted elections to the Legislative Council. Under the Basic Law, all legislative councils are elected, no appointed members. The chief executive has no control over who would be elected to the legislature. The Legislative Council's standing order is decided by the legislature under Article 75(2) of the Basic Law and not by the British government. The Queen, in the old days before 1997, could disallow laws of Hong Kong through the governor, and power of legislation is being reserved to the Crown. The governor could refuse to give assent to any law passed by the legislature. But after 1997, under the Basic Law, we have checks and balances, checks by the Legislative Council. Checks and balance between the executive and the legislative, not allowed under the British rule, but provided under the Basic Law. We look at Article 49. If the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administration consider a bill passed by the Legislative Council is not compatible with the overall interests of the region, he or she may return it to the Legislative Council within 3 months for reconsideration. If the Legislative Council passes the original bill again, but not less than 2/3 majority of all its members, the chief executive must sign and promulgate it within 1 month or act in accordance with the provision of Article 50 of this law, which means that he has to resign. Article 50 reads, if the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region refuses to sign the bill, passed the second time by the Legislative Council, or the Legislative Council refuses to pass a budget or any other important bill introduced by the government, and if consensus still cannot be reached after consultation, the chief executive may dissolve the Legislative Council in his term just once. But if the newly elected Legislative Council still pass the bill, then he must either sign it or resign. That's a check and balance which did not exist in the British days. As far as the budget is concerned, Article 51 of the Basic Law, if the Legislative Council of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region refuses to pass the budget introduced by the government, the chief executive may apply to the Legislative Council for provisional appropriation. If appropriation of public funds cannot be approved because the Legislative Council has already been resolved, the chief executive may, prior to the election of the elected Legislative Council, approve provisional short-term appropriations according to the level of expenditure of previous fiscal year. This means that he must reconsider his situation. So the conclusion is the legislature under the Basic Law is far more powerful and democratic than under the British rule. And we have universal suffrage. We can impeach the chief executive. We have checks and balance in respect of the laws or the budget that's being put forth by the executive. And all the members of the legislature is constituted by election, meaning that the chief executive has no control over them, and they can serve Hong Kong and the people who elected them. We have far more democratic and acceptable arrangement after 1997 than before 1997. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Marie Tam. Moving on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is a political heavyweight, which I'm a little bit intimidated to introduce. She's the convener of the Executive Council. She's a veteran in the Legislative Council. She's a former Secretary of the Security Bureau, but more importantly, she's my boss and the chairman of the New People's Party. Now let's give a big hand to welcome our next speaker, Mrs. Regina Yip.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic, for your kind introduction. As someone who has been elected to the Legislative Council 4 times by universal suffrage in the Hong Kong Island constituency, and more recently in the Hong Kong Island West constituency, I'm very pleased to have a chance to talk about LegCo then and now. I had the bad fortune of joining LegCo in 2008, along with Mad Dog Wong Yuk Man. And then when he joined LegCo, he formed a trio of destructive forces with Albert Chen Wai-yip and long hair Leung Kwok-hong. And he threw the first stone to break the order in LegCo soon after he got elected, when then Chief Executive Donald Tsang introduced the OALA, that is the Old Age Living Allowance. Some of you might recall that Wong Yuk Man threw a bunch of bananas at Donald and insulted him, you know. And then all of us, the other members, became sidelined, you know. The trio, they were very good at grabbing the limelight, you know. All the primetime network were trained on them. And we almost became his supporting cast. That was the start of disorder in LegCo. And they disrupted LegCo proceedings by adopting extreme filibuster, such as by moving several thousand amendments to the appropriation bill, which allocates the funding for the next financial year. And when you have several thousand amendments, it took us hours to veto them, you know, and some of them were really quite ridiculous. Like, I dislike so-and-so EXCO member, I will delete his or her salary, that sort of thing, you know. So it was disorder. And then they also tried to disrupt council proceedings by frequently calling for quorum. I mean, as we all know, we need half, the quorum is 50% of members present, you know. And members do drift in and out of the chamber to take phone calls, you know, to meet clients or government officials. So when long hair resorted to this tactic of calling quorum bell, our proceedings were frequently disrupted. So the pro-government, pro-establishment legislators had to adopt a practice of attending the meeting, introducing a break every 45 minutes so that we could go out to go to the bathroom, that sort of thing, and return within 14 minutes so that the council won't be guillotined because of insufficient quorum. So those were very hard days, but the situation turned from bad to worse after 2012. The national education controversy, when the opposition discovered that they could win votes by stirring up hatred against our country. And they became anti-China in every respect. For example, they opposed national education. They opposed teaching Chinese in Putonghua. They opposed co-location, 一地兩檢, you know, co-location of immigration clearance at the high-speed rail. They call the COVID Wuhan virus. They did everything to smear our country, you know. And they opposed the national anthem bill. And the opposition came to a head in 2019 when the government introduced the rendition bill. And then they resorted to physical violence, literally physical violence. The opposition members became strong-armed boys and prevented us even from entering the conference room to conduct spill scrutiny. So we could not scrutinize the rendition bill. And they deployed mass protests to surround the Legislative Council. And on 1st July 2019, they vandalized, they sacked the Legislative Council and Legislative Council proceedings were stopped for a few months, Parts of our building was actually burned, And then what happened now? Thanks to the central authorities, after the enactment of the National Security Law effective 30th June 2020, a lot of the opposition figures immediately fled Hong Kong, and then the opposition became weakened. And then in early 2021, when the central authorities decided to overhaul our system to permit more rational and balanced participation by changing our electoral laws to introduce three components of the legislature, 20 elected by universal suffrage, such as myself, elected in Hong Kong Island West, and Dominic in New Territories Northeast, 30 from functional constituencies, and 40 from the election committee, which is like an upper council, to introduce more rationality and balance and to provide more wide-ranging representation in the legislature. So following these changes, order was restored in the Legislative Council. A new round of elections were held in 2021. The fifth term was extended by 1 year. I was re-elected in December 2021. And since then, what happened? No more filibuster, no more physical violence in LegCo, no more throwing of bananas or glasses or snatching of papers from the officials. And in the extended fifth term of the legislature, according to our President Andrew Leung, we enacted 126 bills, of which 46 were enacted in 2021. That means last year alone we enacted 46 bills. And what we did was not only important in terms of numbers, we managed to enact very socially important legislation, like opening up medical registration. We revised the Medical Registration Council Bill to permit the admission of more overseas qualified doctors. We amended the Mandatory Provident Fund Ordinance and related legislation to permit the offsetting of the severance pay, etc., with the benefits of the Mandatory Provident Fund. We also finally enacted amendments to the Copyright Ordinance, which was delayed 2 times, And this year, I am now chairing a very important bill called the Town Planning Miscellaneous Amendments Bill, which is an omnibus bill which will amend 6 ordinances that has to do with town planning, reclamation, foreshore and seabed, roads, railways, that sort of thing. Without the amendments proposed, we won't be able to compete development of the northern metropolis or the artificial islands in decades. So this sort of amendments very necessary for Hong Kong's future, but without the introduction of the national security law and the overhaul of the electoral system, we would not have the slightest chance of achieving this. So I can sum up by saying that our Legislative Council has now returned to order, rationality, and functionality, which is very good for the future of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a first-term LegCo member who has an outstanding professional background. She was among the first batch of lawyers who is qualified in Hong Kong, both Hong Kong and the mainland jurisdiction since 1995. She took the award of the Top 20 Global General Counsel by Financial Times in 2017 and was awarded Woman In-House Lawyer of the Year 2017 by Asian Legal Business. And together with myself, she is one of the delegates who was supposed to attend the Westminster seminar representing LegCo before the invitation was rescinded. So let's give a warm welcome to our next speaker, Ms. Carmen Khan.
Thank you, Dominic. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to have been invited by Hong Kong United Foundation and China Retold to speak in this seminar. As many of you may have noted, the President of the LegCo, Honorable Andrew Leung, issued a statement expressing strong disapproval and staunch opposition to the United Kingdom branch of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Associations to decide to withdraw its invitation to the Hong Kong legislature to attend the 2023 Westminster Seminar on Effective Parliaments. It was said by many that the withdrawal was a lack of propriety and was possibly out of the fear to let the participants hear from Dominic and me about an effective legislature of Hong Kong. Now I answer Dominic's question of why I stepped forward to serve the Legislative Council. As many of you know, I have no political affiliation, but have always served the community. The social unrest since June 2019 and before the promulgation of the National Security Law in June 2020 had thrown Hong Kong into disorder. The so-called mutual destructions was totally unacceptable, and it jeopardized Hong Kong's constitutional order and challenged national sovereignty. Following the restoration of law and order by the National Security Law and the improvement of the electoral system in 2021, I thought it's time I put my best foot forward under the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. With a love of the country and a finance and dual qualification legal background, I thought I should contribute my past 30 years of experience to serve on the LegCo. Like many of my colleagues, and in fact, there was not only me, but also a whole host of professional and passionate candidates running in these elections. Prior to the electoral reform, the LegCo's original key functions of lawmaking and approval of public finance had been neglected to the detriment of Hong Kong as a whole. So my goal was simple, to play my part in the rebalancing and put things right. With time constraints, I would focus on using 3 Ps to illustrate the significance of Hong Kong's electoral reforms. They are professionalism, patriotism, and productivity. First, professionalism. Following the electoral reform, we are seeing outstanding and visionary professionals in their respective fields with a wealth of experiences to bring to the LegCo. This has tremendously enhanced the government's and the overall quality of the work of the LegCo, and has mobilized the government to make and deliver promises for the common good of Hong Kong and the country. Second, patriotism. We are seeing the true workings of patriots administering Hong Kong. The LegCo is now filled with legislative councillors full of passion and ability who truly perform the functions of the LegCo so that Hong Kong could stay true to the original design of one country, two systems, enshrined in the PRC Constitution and the Basic Law. Finally, productivity or effectiveness. With no more filibustering, the LegCo has since focused its time and efforts in performing the legislative and other functions under the Basic Law, playing its part to put Hong Kong back on stage. To give a few examples, according to the annual report made by the President of the LegCo, in the 2022 session, the government tabled 25 pieces of bills, 17 of which have been passed into law. Over 180 pieces of sub-legislation were dealt. On public finance, 70 projects were approved, involving a commitment of approximately 177.5 billion Hong Kong dollars. On checking on the government, 33 members' motions was debated. Over 1,000 questioning and supplementary questioning were put to the government. Productivity would bring about prosperity. So no sensible person would say the Hong Kong legislature is ineffective or the situation in Hong Kong is deteriorating. And neither is the legislature rubber stamping the government's proposals. Our media friends would remember my very own rejection of the government's proposed removal of the negative vetting power in handling certain quarantine measures. Ladies and gentlemen, by just looking at the 3 Ps I just shared with you, we have been and will continue to see a most effective legislature for Hong Kong ever. I could go on and tell the significance of the electoral reform. The above was part of what I was going to say in the Westminster seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Our next speaker, just like Carmen, is a practicing solicitor besides being a lawmaker. He's the vice chairman of the Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong, DAB, and a former chairman of the Youth Division. He was elected to the Legislative Council in 2016, and in the recent election in 2021, he received 93,195 votes, which is the most votes anyone received in this past election. Now, let's give a round of applause to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Holden Chow.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I must strenuously denounce the UK parliamentary group in their earlier decision to unilaterally rescind the scheduled meeting with our LegCo colleagues. With their falsehoods plus their groundless accusations against one country, two systems, such an action is widely believed as part of their campaign orchestrated to smear Hong Kong and the central government. Given their unscrupulous action taken, we are bound to set the record straight. Let me express my gratitude to the Hong Kong United Foundation and also China Retold in swiftly organizing this seminar so that we all are able to hear, to make a timely response via this platform. Today, I would like to address more on the positive change brought by the central government and one country, two systems since 1997. Western pundits and politicians have been fond of comparing the past, namely the time when Hong Kong was under the British rule, and present. And whenever they do so, by distorting facts, they would falsely claim that Hong Kong's situation is only getting worse under one country, two systems. And as these falsehoods and lies have been told a million times, amplified by local and Western media, unfortunately, some people, even with sharp mind and professional background, would likely be misled. As time goes by, as a result, some people would form prejudice against China due to their wrongful perception that Hong Kong was jeopardized by central government. For those with an hidden aim to suppress China, their blatant smearing actions bear fruit. But the truth always lies in figures and statistics. Take GDP per capita as an example. In 1997, it was 27,000 US dollars. But in 2021, it was over 49,000 US dollars. So it's almost doubled that of over 25 years ago. Tourists, in 1997, it was only 10.4 million. But in 2019, pre-pandemic level, it was increased 5-fold to over 55 million. Our Hong Kong stock market, the total value was 413 billion US dollars back in 1997, whereas in 2021, it was increased over 10-fold to more than 4,200 billion US dollars. For foreign direct investment in Hong Kong, it was valued at around 1,900 billion Hong Kong dollars back in 1998, but it was increased almost 8-fold to 15,000 billion dollars in 2020. Now, in similar vein, in 2020, Hong Kong investment into foreign jurisdictions reached the value of over 16,000 billion dollars, as compared to only around 1,900 billion back in 1998. Now, these figures only tell us the truth. Under one country, two systems, Hong Kong has been thriving over the past 25 years. Backed by mainland, we survived many challenges, including SARS pandemic, the global financial crisis, and the late COVID-19 pandemic too. With due respect to UK pundits, the UK government seems to fall short of public expectation in delivering their promise to their own people. Devastating economy as a result of their Brexit move. Hyperinflation was harming the grassroots the most. Now, suffice to say, they have no alternatives but to rely on a shameful scam, so-called BNO scheme, in ripping off Hong Kong people's money to bolster their own economy. Shameful. And every now and then, they would make statements or blatant moves in discrediting Hong Kong to smear our national security law and even trample our rule of law, in the hope that their falsehoods and lies could at least divert some, well, if not all, public attention from their dreadful domestic governance. I'm not in a position to comment too much on other countries' politics, but I would suggest the UK politicians to mind their own business. As Hong Kong is poised to reopening ourselves, we have every reason to believe that there will surely be a comeback for Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you, Holden. Our next speaker is the latest addition to the Legislative Council. He is one of the 4 new members of the LegCo who won the by-election that took place last December. Before running for office, he founded a platform on Facebook called the Save Hong Kong, and at one point had close to 200,000 members before being shut down by Facebook for anonymous reasons. Now let's give it up for our next speaker, Mr. Adrian Ho.
Thank you, Dominic. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here today to express my disapproval of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's decision to rescind an invitation to a global seminar on parliamentary democracy for Hong Kong lawmakers. This act of discrimination exemplifies hypocrisy and a double standard. It is hypocritical for the CPA UK to preach parliamentary democracy while denying Hong Kong delegates the right to participate in democratic dialogue. The CPA UK's decision was prompted by the alleged deteriorating situation in Hong Kong. Yet, they have remained silent against countries where authoritarianism is evident. This justification appears even more ludicrous when delegates from other countries with repressive regimes are permitted to attend the seminar. Human rights organizations have previously condemned these countries for committing heinous crimes such as extrajudicial executions, torture, and forced disappearances, as well as imposing excessively severe punishments, including the death penalty, on people who were identified as LGBT. It is apparent that the primary objective here is not to promote parliamentary democracy. This is about determining which countries are deserving of inclusion in the discussion, which is a contentious decision that diminishes Hong Kong's influence in global politics. This decision serves a stark reminder that the UK is still subject to its colonialist tendencies. Hong Kong has developed into a significant international trading and financial center since our return to our motherland. Foreign governments ought to treat us with respect rather than robbing us of our rights. Facts and evidence refute the UK parliamentary group's accusations that the situation in Hong Kong has deteriorated. The Hong Kong government has worked tirelessly to maintain stability and prosperity, and the city's international reputation has remained relatively unscathed. In actuality, it is the UK situation that has deteriorated significantly in recent years as a result of the Brexit debacle and the COVID pandemic, which has caused untold suffering amongst its citizens. It is blatantly obvious that the withdrawal of the global seminar invitation had nothing to do with the situation in Hong Kong. It is about the UK attempting to exert control over a region it no longer rules. This situation represents a gross abuse of authority and runs counter to all that parliamentary democracy stands for. Politicians in the US and the UK are growing more cautious as China continues to consolidate its position as an economic and military giant. When the West is unable to compete with China, it resorts to petty politics and exclusionary tactics. This is incredibly disappointing. The UK needs to cease playing games and start respecting the rights of the Hong Kong lawmakers. They must acknowledge that they will never have complete control of the entire world, and that the only way forward is for all parties to communicate respectfully, including those with whom the West may not always agree. This is how a true parliamentary democracy should operate. The UK's decision to exclude Hong Kong delegates from its seminar is nothing more than political posturing, and it must end. I urge the UK CPA to reflect on its decision. Constructive discussion and communication are fundamental to any functioning democracy, particularly in today's divided world. It is time for the UK to take the initiative to exercise true leadership. Failing to do so, they risk losing their reputation as a proponent of parliamentary democracy. We can only hope that the UK, as well as all other countries, will realize how crucial it is to hear from all perspectives. True progress can only be made in this manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Now, let me introduce our final speaker for today. Our next speaker is a rising political star and is a social media phenomenon. Her YouTube channel has more than 300,000 subscribers and is currently the youngest member of the Legislative Council. Not only is she vocal on local matters, she is also among the first person to represent Hong Kong to speak at the United Nations Human Rights Council. Now let's give a big round of applause to welcome our final speaker, Ms. Josie Chan.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to share my personal experience on political development of Hong Kong. I ran for 3 elections in the past decade, including the District Council election. And in my first attempt for the Legislative Council, I stand for the Federation of Hong Kong Trade Union, and I gained my seat from the geographical constituency in the New Territory Southwest. I've had the honor to speak for and to stand up for Hong Kong and for our motherland at 4 general meetings or side meetings at the United Nations. And I'm dismayed to learn that the UK has denied the opportunity for our colleagues to speak, which stands against the international standards. When the UK has so much misunderstanding, or I may say prejudice against us, in order to resolve the differences and to learn of the real situation in Hong Kong, the UK must precipitate communication and not to prevent communication. Foreign politicians often adopt the misleading, self-deceiving rhetoric of Hong Kong's situation deteriorating and the legislature dysfunctioning. Who are in the best position to tell what's really like in Hong Kong and in the Legislative Council? The people in Hong Kong and the people in the Legislature. I've been through elections before and after the improvement of the electoral system. Before, I was subjected to violence and life threats when I conducted my election campaign back in 2019. After the reform of the electoral system, I could finally run for the election in 2021 without fear for my own safety. And I think that speaks it all. And now, as a female and the youngest member of the Legislative Council, I can rightly say I'm one of the best spokespersons when it comes to commenting on the plurality and the precipitation of Legislature. Statistics-wise, we see an increase in the proportion of female members, as Carmen and I, as well as Ms. Gina Yip, are also current members, and a decrease in the average age of the members as well. The wider implication is that after the improvement in the electoral system, we can see a more diverse representation and an increase in youth participation in the establishment. Surely it helps the Legislative Council as a whole to address the concerns of the people. And that's the key to any effective parliament and legislature around the world. In assessing the effectiveness of the Legislative Council, let me also give you some facts and figures. Last year alone, 30 members' motions were passed, whereas in 2019, before the reform of the electoral system, there was none. No members' motion was able to pass in the Legislative Council. So the legislature was basically not functioning. Also last year, the Bills Committee held 42 meetings spanning 87 hours for the deliberation of bills, which is more than double the number in 2019. As an illustration, I would also like to highlight to you, and Ms. Honorable Regina Yip also mentioned, is the passage of the amended Copyright Law Bill. We did it last year, which was to extend the copyright protection to works distributed by electronic means. The bill was raised to Legislative Council twice before, in 2011 and 2014. Yet, due to filibustering, the legal procedures could not be completed. So you can see the improvement in the electoral system has helped Hong Kong out of the pan-politician quagmire, putting the legislature back on track. Statistics do not lie, and they are open data. I suggest if any of the foreign politicians who are really interested in understanding Hong Kong and engaging in constructive dialogue, they should first check the public records and see the facts themselves. As a final note, I've hosted several tours around LegCo for people who really wanted to learn the true story of Hong Kong's legislature. And I welcome any foreign politicians to join. I thank Hong Kong United Foundation for promptly organizing this seminar so that we can clarify the matters. Perhaps next time we can also invite foreign politicians to come and exchange views in a civil manner. And I'm sure the HKUF will not revoke the invitations unilaterally halfway through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jovi Chan. Okay. Today we have had many wonderful speakers who spoke about the unique characteristics of the Hong Kong legislature and why it's more democratic and broadly representative than it was under the British rule, and particularly after its revamp in 2021. However, as Western politicians are now more determined than ever to undermine the growth of China, more false accusations are going to be made against our country in the future. Besides the government effort like the recent Hong Kong campaign and the CE's outreach tours, we also need more and more people just like you, those watching at home, to join us in the quest of telling good Chinese stories. We need mass participation from the Hong Kong community in order to succeed. So if you're interested, please set up a Twitter account, look up Dominic Lee, send me a private message, and we'll get in touch. Thank you so much for all the speakers today. It's wonderful, but this seminar is only a beginning. Moving forward, we will continue to seek different opportunities to speak out positively about China and Hong Kong. We will let the world hear our true story and let them know what we are all about. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, goodbye.